Hi everyone, it's Xanthi. It was lovely to meet you today. I'm just going to do a recap of what we learnt in Photoshop just so that you have something to refer back to when we do get around to trying these things next week. So if you want to do a reference or a bit of a play, you can come back here and just hopefully I can jog that memory of that exercise that we did today. So the first thing with Photoshop is I'm going to show you how to open up a new file. We have new, we can select straight into that. We can go up to our file new, or we can do our keyboard shortcut of Command N. So just going back, we're going to choose print. We're going to go A4. We're going to make sure that we've got our width and our height, which is A4, which is preset. We're going to change our orientation to landscape. Now we've got our millimeters here. We can change that to different kind of increments. Pixels are great for, and are usually a web standard, but for majority of things, millimeters is what we kind of work with. If we're working in millimeters and we're working on a printed item, we work in a different color mode. We work in CMYK, which stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and key. So these two color modes, the RGB is for digital and online, and the CMYK is for printed applications. So because we're working in an A4 document, we plan to get this printed. We're going to choose CMYK. I'm going to select Create, and ta-da! There's our document. So if I know that this did come up today, if you did need to change that orientation, you can go up to Image, Rotate Canvas, and here this gives you an opportunity to flip it clockwise. What side? I'm just going to undo that. If you recall, we were using our Tools palette. We have this is probably essentially our master palette out of the whole Photoshop application, and we have other palettes along here that we use. History is a very handy one, but we also have layers, channels, paths. That's a really important palette to have. We'll start looking at character and paragraph, some of our text ones next week. If you're missing a palette, we can always find it in our window up in our top nav, and our window will show us where the history is. It'll show us where our layers and our paths are, which is what we need for today. So going back to our tools, this is sort of our navigation arrow. This helps us move an object left and right. This is our marquee tool. You can see that the tooltips are happening when I sort of just hover my cursor over the top of them. We have a different type of selection. If I just click on Control, I can see all the different options. So here we've got a quick selection and a magic wand. I've also got cropping tools, eyedroppers, which I'll explain a little bit more next week. We've got the pen tool, which we used today, and several others. We also have our colours as well, so our foreground and our background, which we discussed today as well. So right here is probably your essential palette of just the little functions. And remember, we also have, if we go up to our, say we've got our brush here, we've also got our breadcrumb navigation up the top here. So for example, I'm using the brush tool. I've selected the brush tool. I can change my size, and I can change my shape, and I can change the structure. So I can do a feather brush, I can do a solid brush. I've also got a whole lot of presets in there if I want to start getting fancy, but pretty much most of the stuff that we work with in the industry is like a calligraphy brush, where we sort of start getting the little, we can do the thick and thin, and we can change that access. And we've got just the feather and then just the simple dot. So we can change all of that by scrolling up and down. We've also got opportunities to change the opacity, so I'll just show you quickly with our layers. I'll create a new layer. Remember, every single layer has its own thing. Because that's so fine, we've put an opacity of 18 on that. If I go over the top again, see, it sort of just gives it a little bit of a transparency there. So that's what that opacity is. Flow also just shows you, well, I'll do it, I'll just show you, just gives it a little bit more, it's probably not here. Flow just changes I guess the flow of the ink as such, so it actually starts thinning it out the less percentage that you're using. So I'll just delete that. So over on our right hand side, we had a look today at our history. So it's really important that we remember, if we expand this out so we can see how far we've gone, we can go back. But if I wanted to change anything from a certain point, I lose all of this grayed out data and it just creates a new one from that last function. So history panels are really, really, really important. You might actually notice, and we didn't talk about this today, we might actually notice that there's little things on the side, these little check boxes. This is just a real anchor point. So remember I was saying that we've only got a certain amount of history items that we can go back on. Say for instance I had quite a big function I needed to get through, like a big document. I can actually save my last change, and I can go around, but I can still go back to that function. So that's kind of a special save function, and I'll explain a little bit more about that next week, because we'll actually get into a point where we might be able to use that. So we also have our layers palette. Now remember, this is kind of like a sandwich. What we're doing now is working in a master document. This is what we are calling our master document, and we're going to sort of start layering things on top. So by putting things on, as if you were to cut out a magazine and build your own composite with glue and scissors, this is kind of what we're doing on our own page. And every single object should have its own assigned layer. We don't need to have this background layer locked, and it's probably good practice just to double click and take away that lock on this one. Just for this background, I think it's not necessary. I think the reason why is if we turn that visibility off, you can see that checkerboard, and that's our transparency background. So that will come in handy a little bit later when we move into probably our third and fourth session, where when we bring this document into InDesign. You'll see why that's important. So we've also got our paths, and we haven't created any paths yet, but let's just begin with bringing the images in. We're going to bring in the bed, and we're going to bring in the Charles Blackman image. So there's a couple of ways we can do that. We can file open, and I obviously don't have a quick link to this. We can bring up two. I'm just holding shift so I can open two at once, and this is going to open up two separate windows. See that? So up here is our tabs for the different windows. So we can just pull that, click and drag that window down, and click that layer, and make sure that this background layer is over here. Remember, all my active open Photoshop documents I can find at the bottom here. So I'm just going to click and drag. Excellent. So I'm just going to go back to my window, try and find that original document. I'm going to close that down. Click. So now you can see I've only got two open. And I'm going to bring Charles Blackman's Girl with Hands, and I'm going to bring that in there too. So I'm just going to move that around with my cursor. Alright, so close that down, don't need that open. So what we're going to do quickly is I'm just zooming in with a command and a plus symbol. I can always go into view, and I can always zoom in and zoom out through view. If I zoom out, this is the fit to screen if I get too crazy by going close, or 100% is 1. So you can see that those shortcuts are there. Once you get more and more familiar, these shortcuts do become second nature. So what we're going to do now is we're happy with that position. We can see that our layers are separated. I'm going to relabel layer 1 bedroom. So I have double clicked on that layer, double click, and I've just retyped it there. So I'm going to type in painting. Now I can also change the colour of it. Remember, we were talking a little bit today about changing the colour of that thing. This actually has no function to your design whatsoever, but this is a filing function. So if you do see some colours that happen in your layers, just unless that you've done it specifically for your filing and your referencing purposes, you don't need to use colours. But and they won't impact your master document. They're only just a part of your file organisation. So now that we've layered, we'll type in background. Ta-da! Okay. So now that we've got our files in here, there are other ways to bring in files. And they do impact the way that your layer is rasterized. So we were talking about our pixels and things being clear. With this Charles Blackman painting, we did talk about scaling it and what happens when we bring it down to small and then we bring it back up, and how we lose that data. So it's really important that we know what we're doing at the beginning of the project, so that we know the outcome. So scaling it around and having a bit of a play, we don't have that luxury unless we get to our finder and we click and drag directly onto this master. So what I've done here is it's hidden underneath the bedroom at the moment, but you can still see the box and you can still see how it's got that cross right in the center. This means that it's a smart object. I'm just going to bring that up, pull that up so we can see it. So remember, we've got the little dinker there. That tells us it's a smart object, and I can actually scale that up and down because that particular item is sourcing somewhere else, like it's an external file, and we can change it in here, but we can't edit the pixels in the master document. So there is a purpose why this is actually a really, really cool function. At the stage, you won't need to really think about this function, but you need to know how to be able to get around that function. So what I need you to do is to control or right click, and we're going to right click on the name, and we're going to go up to here, rasterize file. So this gives us the opportunity now. We're not going to another document. We're actually always going to keep in our master document, and this gives us the opportunity now to muck around with the image, and we can change the colors and we can do whatnot. We can't do this when we do have that cross over the image and that little dinker. So it's really important that you know that right click and that rasterize layer, when that is highlighted and done, how important that is. Otherwise it'll drive you up the wall. So we're going to do the scaling now, and with the scale, remember, we call it transforming, and that you use the transform tool. So I'm going to, because of the nature of, undo that, because I'm on that wrong layer, because of the nature of this shape, we've got our lower horizontal axis and our upper. We're just going to put this in a position. So I'm going to just focus on that focal point so I can scale that down. So to do that, I use Apple T, and I get these points up the top. So remember, if I stretch it, and I'll undo that, or I can stretch it up, undo that, or I can grab the corners and I can actually start scaling it around. So I'm going to bring this down. I'm going to hold shift because shift is going to keep it in proportion, and I'm going to bring it right down, and I'm going to say, alright, that's perfect. So what I'm looking at here is I'm making sure that that point and that point sit in a nice thing, and I'm going to click enter. So now I've actually added that task, or that task that we've just done, I've added that to our history, so I can go back if I need to. I'm just going to zoom in. So I've done Command plus. To move around, you can see how I've got that white hand. I actually just use a space bar. This just helps me move around without having to actually affect my artwork. It's just a handy way for when I zoom in. I can also use that hand there, and that will just help me zip it left, zip it right, and move it around as I feel free. If I want to start moving things, I need to go back up into my cursor, and then I can sort of start moving things around. So going back on task to our transform tool, we've scaled it down, we've got our right proportions with our top and bottom, but we need to get this distortion happening. So we're going to go back to doing our Command T, Command Transform, and I'm just going to hold Control, and I'm going to hold Shift as well, so it's a little bit fiddly. The reason why I'm going to hold Shift is because it's going to keep that right vertical line nice and straight and horizontal. Sorry, I'm going to use Command and Shift. Sorry about that. Command and Shift, and it's just going to pull all the way up. So what I'm looking at is getting that top line and making that look like it's in proportion. Now I've also got to move a little bit down. So Command and Shift, and just getting that right. And Enter. So if I zoom out, I now have this fantastic, beautiful little proportional or diamond, everything's in perspective. I can just shift that around. I'm just using my arrow keys at the moment, left, right, up and down, just to get a little bit fiddly, put it in position so I feel a little bit better about it. So that's the basic function for the transform and moving that around. So when we go back into that transform, because I've already made that square, and I think this is a flaw in Photoshop, that it doesn't actually follow that selection, that it actually resquares it. This makes it a little bit difficult to move around from now. So try and do it in your first instance. But we're going to click our command. We also have other options that are really handy to get a bit of familiarization with, and it doesn't really apply to this graphic that we're using, but we've got things that we can distort, we can rotate, we've got perspective and warping. Now warping's a little bit tricky to get a handle on, and it's only got a certain ability to distort, but you can actually get a little bit crazy with things. So if that was going to be a flag, for instance, I've got the ability to move that with that transform warp function. So it kind of gives you a little bit more of an idea of the things that we can do with that transform tool. I do want to also show you briefly what we talked about today with painting layer. And actually, sorry, all that rumbling's my dishwasher. So we've got the painting. We're going to put a drop shadow on that. I'm going to just double click on the side there, and it's going to pop up a window. Now this window was the layer style, and we can see that it produces a drop shadow. So overall I can change the blending options of that layer, but I can also add that drop shadow. So I've got the ability to put an opacity on it. I can change the angle, so I can move that light source around. The light source is pretty generic, so if I affect other bits and pieces of the document, I can actually get it to auto sync into a global light. But there we go, global light. So it should be the same as what inner shadow light is. Yep. So if I take that off, I can take it off to a different light. So because we've got a light source at the bottom here, sorry, because we've got a light source at the bottom, the light should be coming straight up through the top there. I can also change the distance of that shadow, so it can make something look a little bit further off the wall. I can change the spread, but I don't really like to use that. See how I've got sort of a sharp corner versus a nice feather? I don't really like to use the spread too much, but I do like the size. And the size does make a difference depending on what you're doing. This is all very much by sight, and it does take a little bit of practice to get the hang of. It's rare that I use a really hard shadow, but for something like this, yeah, you can use a shadow if you feel free. So what happens is when you do actually apply something like that, it actually applies FX, which means effects, EFF, CT. Yes, so there you go, a little tooltip, indicates effects. So it'll also show you here what the effects are applied. So I've got a drop shadow and that's applied to my layer. I can just reduce that, I can collapse that, or I can open it up and see that there. And if we zoom out, we now have our beautiful little picture. Now, I did briefly talk to some of you about blending options. First blending option I would do is going into my layer style. I would sort of gradient overlay on this because nothing's quite flat, especially in this sort of instance. So I can preview it and see what I'm doing. I put a little gradient over it. If I put it on a blending mode of multiply and put an opacity on it, I can actually give things a little bit of shadow. So that it actually sits a little bit better in the room. And this is really kind of important when we get a little bit further into a rendering sort of scenario, rather than just having something stuck in like a sticker. It just makes that feel a little bit less static. So just putting a little bit on, putting in the opacity, having a bit of a tinker. There's no one size fits all. It really is about your sight and a little bit of practice. You start getting the hang of what kind of things are going to work for you, what things you think are going to suit. So for me personally, I quite like the gradient overlay. There are other ways to make this feel like it sits in the room a little bit more. And that sort of includes using some of these blending modes. So like an overlay makes things look a little bit soft. A multiply sort of blends it into the room. But because we've got that gradient overlay, I think that should be fine. If you wanted to get rid of that gradient overlay effects, you can actually just click and drag it and throw it straight from there. But I quite like it. So that's our first part. I'm going to quickly show you paths. I've got 15% left in my battery on my computer today. So I'm going to show you the pendant and we're going to do that path again. So I'm going to bring it in and I'm going to click and drag it like this again. I'm going to scale it at this point. And I've just held shift just to bring it up. Now because this is an external layer, because remember I've got my smart little dinker there. Remember that takes me to a new document. I want to remove that because I want to start editing and removing pixels in this document. So I'm going to go right click on the name and I'm going to go rasterize layer. There we go. So we've got our pendant. Now I'm going to go zoom right in so I can get a good detail look at this. Now this is going to, I'm just going to collapse that. We're going to use our pen tool, which we can find over here. And we're just going to plot some points. And I'm going to be no curves in this one. It's just very simple. We're just going to go plot, 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 straight around. Nice and quick because it's a pretty simple path, this one. Like even though it's a complex object, it's pretty simple because it's just all straight lines. I'm not going to stress too much because I'm going to go back and we're going to have a little play and move some of those individual points away and around. So I'll just go around quickly. Now remember, I have to make sure that this goes back to being a complete path. By complete path, it needs to get back to that first starting point, so that way we can close it. So right along here, up, up, down, and I'll ignore that. Okay, so I've closed it. Now remember when I close it, I have that little circle on the right hand side of my cursor. That means I've closed that path. So that's a kind of good thing that we need to know. Now see, I've got a minus on that now. If I move along, I've got a plus. A minus means I can remove it. And that's just automatically happened as I've scrolled across, as I've moved my cursor along without clicking or touching anything. I can, if I just hover over that line, I can add extra points in. So I'll add an extra one there. Now here's our Bezier curve, and if I just select A, my white arrow, you can see A is here, and I click on that path. I select that. See, I can move that, and I can start getting some little curves happening there. So I'm just going to remove that by, I'll go to my pen tool. I'm going to click Option. And I'm going down to the minus. I'm going to delete that anchor point. So because I ran through this pretty quickly, There's some areas that I don't really like. We've got up here, I really need to keep inside that object to make sure that I'm keeping that cut clean. So I want to right click, I've got my selection. So I'll make sure I'm on my white arrow because that gives me individual anchor points. And I just click on it and I can just slowly drag them and put them into where I need them to be. So I can actually do proper lines as well. If I click and drag a line, it just gives me that sort of option. But it's good practice just to keep on the path, on the point, beg your pardon. So just going to move those in a little bit. Now because this is just an image I've just taken off the web, it's not a good image. You can see that it's quite pixelated, and I'm not really happy with the way that is sitting. So rather than putting a feather, when I go to my paths, I'm going to make sure that I put a 1% feather on this. Sorry, I'm just going to plug in. There we go. So I've relocated. So I've got my closed path. I want to save it. Now I've lost it. Fantastic. I'm going to go over to my paths, and I've got work path. That's a pretty generic standard. It's important if you want to keep this path that you save it. You can always delete them later, but it's good practice just to save it. I've had an instance this afternoon where I didn't save a few paths and I had to redraw them a couple of times. So it's just handy just to actually have them saved. And yeah, you can come back to it whenever you need to and delete it if required. So just going to save this pendant. And I now have a saved path. So if I unselect down here, it removes the path. If I go back, I can pull that back up again. So what we want to do now is I want to go to our Dinka little menu in the paths. I want to make selection. So this is our feather radius. Because I was saying this is a low-res image and we don't have a nice definition of lines, I'm making that feather radius 1. So if I have it at 0, 0 is pretty much a standard for a high quality image, but because we're using a crappy image, I think 1 should suffice. So we want to, and this is our only option at this image, but at the moment I just want to create a new selection. So I'm going to click OK. Now in our I'll click that again. In our make selection, some of these I'll explain next week. We go into a little bit more detail about deep etching and cutting out. And I'll explain what they do and why they are important next week. So I'm just going to unclick that path, so that way I've got my marching ants on my object, zooming out with the command minus, and just using my spacebar just to move myself into position. I'm going to go to my layers palette. I'm going to make sure that I'm on my pendant layer, and I'm not on any other layer. I don't want to be on my bedroom, I don't want to be on a painting, I want to be on a pendant. It's really important that you pay attention to what layer that you're moving and deleting and editing while you're in your marching ants. So I'm just going to click delete. Now if your path is set this way, perfect. If not, you can inverse it by doing your selection, and you can go inverse, and here's your shortcut, and that will delete the opposite or vice versa. So I can go Shift Command I, and that can make everything deleted. If I need to deselect, now some people today, we started moving on and doing some transforms, so Command T, but we actually started manipulating it. So we need to make sure that we deselect once we've completed that action. So I'm going to just undo that. Go back to my history just to make sure. Oops, sorry. Well, we've cleared it, and I'm going to deselect. So I can go up to select and deselect, or I can just do the Apple D. And we're deselected. Now, that's our wonderful pendant in position. Quite happy with it there. Just needs a lovely cord. So for this exercise, now that we've got our path, for this exercise I'm just going to get you to open a new layer. So over here in our layers palette, we've got a couple of different options which we'll explore a little bit more next week. But one I want to focus on is creating a new layer. Now I want to draw a line. I know it's associated with the pendant, but at this stage, because we're adding some elements and pixels to that layer, it needs to be its own layer. I'm going to double click and type in chord, and it's really important that that we do label it, because if we start building and building and building our layers, it does get a little bit clunky. So I'm going to go up to, I'm going to make sure my colours are here. I've got my foreground colour and background colour. I don't know why they're so ugly. I'm going to double click on the foreground. I'm going to make it a bit charcoal because nothing in interior design land is perfect black. And especially when you're doing sort of rendering of an internal of a house, or an external for that matter. You've got different lights, light, dark and shade and things that affect those colours. So I've chosen my foreground colour. I don't need to worry about this background colour just yet. I'm going to go up to my brush. I'm going to just go up here to my sort of brush tooltip. I want to make sure that my flow is back up to 100%. I want to put my opacity back to 100%. I just want to change my shape of my, not shape but size. I don't want a big brush, and I don't want it to have a feather. I want it to be quite sharp. So I'm just going to make sure it's nice and neat. So I'm pretty happy with my brush, and I'm going to make sure I'm on my chord layer. And if I just click down here and hold shift and just drag, it actually automatically brings that in a straight line. So here we've just sort of manually drawn in that chord. We've got all the other, we've got the flexibility to move around. I do recommend that we use a mouse for this rather than your trackpad, because you get a little bit more strength and a little bit more accuracy. But because we're just basically doing a straight line, a simple plot, hold shift and drag will give you a nice straight line. So if we zoom out, we've got our little chord there. Now that probably wouldn't sit at the top, it'll probably sit below, so we'll just bring that, click and drag. We can move that layer up and below as we need to. So I'll just zoom in a little bit. We can also draw, like the reason why we have to do our own layers, if I drew that on a pendant layer, I'm adding pixels to that layer and I won't be able to get rid of it. So if I'm going to put a brush in here, there's no way I can move that around. It's stuck on that layer and I've basically ruined it. I'm going to have to go back, and if I'm going to remove it, I've got to edit it. It's just ridiculous. Like it's just time consuming and clumsy. So it's really handy to know that if you put an extra layer, it's not going to affect the integrity of that original layer, and you won't have to retouch and go back and if you make a mistake. So I'll just delete that layer. Another cool thing is with this pendant and moving it around and drawing is that I can sort of start adding in. Now we've got that path tool, I'm just going to create a new path. It's going to be really silly, and it's going to look silly. I'm happy with that. I'm just going to plot some points in a theoretical. So now I've got my curve. I'm going to go to my paths. I'm going to light double click. I'm going to make a selection. I'm going to go one as well. I'm going to just switch that foreground colour. I've just clicked up here to switch them around. Just going to move this around, give it a little bit more white light. So that's our new colour and our current colour. So you'll notice that there's a whole lot of numbers over here. This is what designers use for different codes. So like this colour will be a web-based colour, and then this is a CMYK colour. So you don't need to worry too much about that unless you've been assigned to use a specific colour, say a PMS swatch and that's a story for another day. Going into our layer 1, we've got our selection, we've got a brand new layer that's fresh. I'm just going to go, oops, I'm going to invert it. I'm going to go Command-Shift-I to invert my selection, and I'm going to go Control, oops, Option-Delete. So what I've done is I've filled that path, and I've filled that marching it, and I've filled that selection right there with a big massive light beam, and of course it looks ridiculous. I'm not denying it doesn't. I'm going to deselect that at the moment because we don't need that. But what I want to do now is I do want to go quickly and show you this tool, and this is the quick selection tool. Now I just want to click that. I'm just going to go wand. I prefer wand personally. I've got a tolerance of 15. Essentially what that's looking at is the tolerance of 15 colours. Because I've used one colour, that's one big swatch, that's going to select the whole lot, including my feather, because I've got 15. If I did one, it's going to select it all. One big colour, it just sort of chooses that. I'll just go to 0 tolerance. Oh no, we don't need that, we're done, sorry. I'm going to deselect that. There's things I can do now to that particular layer to sort of give it a little bit more lifelike. I can sort of start adding some sort of things, and obviously I know that I've done a really crappy creative job here, but just to give you a demonstration of some of these blending modes, I can put an opacity on an object. I can start putting different blending modes. So we've got overlay. You can just sort of see how some of these things start affecting the colour of the pixels on the objects that are underneath. I can also, we'll go into this next week, I'm going to show you what this tool does. I've got clicked that, and all of a sudden I've got this little, this extra little bit over here. This is called our mask. I'm going to use my brush tool, and so notice all of this is gone. Now my colours have gone, and now I've just only got black and white. I'm going to increase the size of my brush. Now the way I'm actually doing that quickly is I'm using my brackets, my left and right. So on the right hand side of your P, you have a left bracket, and that is your reduce. And on your right of that, the right bracket, is an increase. Alternatively, remember, I can go up here and I can change my size of that brush. So going back to what we're doing here with this brush size now and our mask, if I flip that and I put the black on top, I can erase some of that data. So I know we haven't learnt this, but I'll just throw it in anyway. So I can sort of start throwing and moving things in, and it's kind of like the way that I was sort of taught back in the day was that it's kind of like a wax on. I can go change this around, flip it. So basically I remove, I add, whoops. So I can sort of just start flipping and moving, manipulating around. We're going to have a really good play with this next week, and it's going to be, yeah, it's going to be fun. We'll have some fun with this next week, but I just thought I'd give you a heads up with that as well. So your task for homework, just as a practice, is I'd really like for you to run through this exercise again. Now that you have the assets, you should be able to manipulate, have a bit of a play. You know, you might want to put those pendants down here. You might want to have a look at, alright, you want to put a path around this rug, and you might want to try bringing in a texture, or try picking it up and warping. Remember, if you do still have a path, so I will get this pendant path. I've obviously moved my pendant now. So I can actually, if I have that selected, make selection. That. In my bedroom. If I copy that, go Command Copy and paste, Command V. Oh, it's moved me off. I should have inverted it first, my bad. Back to history. go back, and then invert it. I'm going to copy. Remember, I'm on the bedroom here, and I'm going to paste. So I've actually just copied the pixels within that selection, that marching key, that marching ants. I've actually just copied and pasted those particular pixels. Now the reason why that's handy is if I do a new path, right? I'll just do it quickly. Because I'm gas bagging, I'll go point, 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 point. Really simple path. Right, control click, right click, grab the white arrow. I'm just going to move them into position. These are paths. Real quick. Rug. So I'm just going to select that. Make selection. OK. So because I'm on that bedroom layer, if I did want to manipulate that rug in particular, because it is already in part of my document, I do like to actually keep that in the integrity of this. I actually rather duplicate so that I can come back to the original. So if I was going to do that, I copy and paste. So Command C while it's active, marching ants, Command C, Command V. And sorry, I should have inverted it. Copy, paste. Now you'll see that I've actually duplicated the pixels of that bedroom layer. So things I can do with that now is that if I want that rug to be bigger, I can actually sort of start manipulating that as its own item. Because what I've done is I've made that object its own individual layer. So that way it doesn't actually affect, I'm just basically masking what's underneath. We'll do some retouching next week. It's kind of cool. Remember, we're going to do some Beyonce real quick. But if I just wanted to make that rug do its thing, make it bigger. Because of the angle of that rug, it's given me that horrible, this doesn't follow the square. It's a little bit of a tricky one. I really don't like that bottom angle. But yeah, I've got the flexibility there to move. So basically what I wanted to show you with that exercise was that I can take an object out of this original rather than recreating and putting a new thing in. I can actually copy and paste the pixels out of this flat asset, and I can create my own from using that. Gee, that's horrible. A bit better. So if I wanted to start cropping things or getting rid of those getting rid of those edges to crop, I can use a marquee, and I'll just simply delete that. So I just deleted that, keep it out of my hair, and just shuffle it back up to there. So basically I've just created a bigger rug. Don't know why I did that, but just to show you, that's what I've done. So it's on its own layer, rug. Yep. So that's all for that exercise. I do want to show you those curves, don't I? So with our path tool, and this is part of our homework today that I've given. And like I said, it's not mandatory, you're not going to need it for next week, but it's a good handy hint to practice this. And if you're finished with this one, work on something else. So I've opened Deep Etch 2 because it's got the curve. We're just going to use our pen tool with a P all over here. I'm going to start with, just do the simple straight ones, come back up, and I can come back and do all this later. Just wanted to show you how to do these curves. So what I'm going to do with these curves, I'm just going to run around quickly and show you. Basically, it's all about the plot points. So the way you position those plot points is really important. So they need to sit, when you're going around a curve, you kind of need to make sure you're always inside, but where my cursor is now, I've moved away from the plot point. I'm hot clicking and dragging, but I'm actually pushing this little bit out, because what it's doing, and I can't point because it's not going to work. I'm putting it where I want to put the next, along the line of the visual line of where I'm going to put that next plot point. So I'm going to release now, and it's going to remove that. No, it's not. Perfect. And I'm going to put my next plot point, but it's going to actually follow this through. So remember, this is not a plot point. This is just, kind of think of it like a steering wheel. This is the plot point. This is the steering wheel. This is not actually going to affect your path at all in terms of like something that's permanent. You're not visually going to see it, but it's just going to help you manipulate and steer this line. So because I've plotted my plot point here, I've clicked and dragged and I've brought my line out because I've followed the path of where I want this line to go. So I'm going to go all along here. I'm going to click again, and I'm going to drag where I want that next bit to go. So what I'm doing, so if I have another plot point and I move this around, it's going to change the angle of that path. So making sure that we click and we're dragging nice and smooth, and we're just doing our little steering wheel, and we're going to bring that into where we next need that line to go. So coming back around, dot, and then click and drag, plot. Now because I've got kind of a little bit of a right angle here, I'm going to go click, and what I'm going to do is undo it, sorry. Click, before I do move anything, I'm going to click option, and now you're going to see, because I've clicked option, I've actually secured that that line that I've just previously done, and I can change the direction of my path. So say if I needed to go out here, I can, and it won't affect the angle of my previous path. So that's just a handy little tip. I've just clicked, when I've done that, I've just plotted an option before I've moved my tracking cursor. So I don't really need to do that. I can also just plot it. Remember, when I close my path, I need that little zero, and I can go around and finish that off. So essentially plot, no tracking movement, just plot, release. So point A, plot, release. Point B, click and drag. And drag where you next want that line, where that next direction is going to be. So I'm going to go and try and go up and on the right. So I want a nice smooth line. I'm going to release, and then I'm going to follow that line. I'm going to go all the way over here, click and drag, and then we'll go back, click and drag, click and drag, click and drag, and then close the path, click and drag. So there you'll see I've got this little path, nice smooth curves. You kind of think, oh, that doesn't work, I want to open that out, I can. So I use my white selection arrow and I can move that out. Have a play, try a couple of different things. You don't have to try this image, you can try other images, but I'd just like you to get a hang of plotting and getting those nice angles down. Alright, have a good week everyone, I'll speak to you next week. And yeah, hopefully you found this helpful. Alright. I don't know how to stop. You know? Stop telling me to stop. Hmm.